Death is the only promise that life truly keeps for each of us. It is the lights going out, the end of the line, the moment the script ends and the screen turns black. Biology seems clear. When neurons die, consciousness is extinguished. It's a clean, logical explanation and, in a way, reassuring in its absolute finality. It is the end. But what if, in this system, our consciousness wasn't deleted, but rather copied to a new place? For a long time, the idea of reincarnation was forbidden territory for serious science, a sort of dubious terrain where any researcher with a reputation to protect wouldn't dare set foot. But the game has changed. Today, we have a tool that past generations couldn't even dream of. We have processing power capable of analyzing oceans of information that would drown the human mind. We took the largest, most detailed and most controversial archive of alleged rebirth cases ever gathered on the planet and handed it over to a mind capable of seeing what ours cannot. An analytical artificial intelligence we named Numa. We decided once and for all to test the myth with mathematics, and the results the machine gave back made me, a staunch skeptic, feel a chill I had never felt before. Because the numbers don't lie, and what they show shatters everything we thought we knew about what it means to be alive. It all begins in the dusty archives of Dr. Ian Stevenson. In the mid-20th century, this psychiatrist from the University of Virginia did something unthinkable for his time. Instead of treating children who claimed to remember other lives as if they were having hallucinations, he began to listen to them. For 40 years, he traveled the world documenting and verifying every account. In total, 3,000 cases were investigated. This wasn't tabloid gossip, it was a mountain of raw data. For decades, skeptics ignored Stevenson's work, classifying it all as coincidence, childhood fantasy, or cultural influence. But no one had ever subjected this mountain of data to a complete computational analysis. That's why we digitized every one of the 3,000 reports. Every detail, every name, every date, every place mentioned by the children was fed into the system. The task we gave the machine was, in theory, simple. It needed to find statistical patterns and calculate the probability of it all being mere chance. We were looking for a flaw, a bias, a logical and comfortable explanation, and the first pattern the machine found left me in silence for a long time. The system showed that the average age at which a child begins to talk about another life is between 2 and 4 years old, exactly the period when the brain is forming the foundations of language and identity. Then, the machine found something strange. At the exact moment these memories disappear, the graph the machine drew shows a sharp, almost vertical drop around 6 or 7 years of age. Why this age? What happens in the brain of a 7-year-old child? A fundamental biological process occurs called synaptic pruning. It's a major cleanup. The brain cuts neural connections that are not essential to optimize its functioning, to strengthen what really matters for the current life. The new identity is literally installing itself, erasing the vestiges of the old one. A normal childhood fantasy usually works differently. It grows with age and becomes richer. But here, the opposite happened. It is a process of programmed forgetting, a formatting that perfectly coincides with a known biological event. It was like observing a system rebooting and clearing temporary memory to function better. But that was just the beginning. The machine was only warming up. The age at which the children spoke was intriguing, but the real proof lay in the content of what they said. And when we started crossing these words with real records of people who had already died, the mathematics of coincidence simply broke. Ian Stevenson was methodical, almost obsessive. He recorded every statement from the children before any verification was done. A child would say, "I lived in the city of Villara. My name was Ravi. I had a candy shop and died when a truck hit me at the intersection near the temple." Thousands of statements like this were catalogued. We gave our machine a simple task: cross-reference these memories with the facts. The system scoured death certificates, police records, period maps, and newspaper archives. The verification result was an accuracy of 82%. 82%. Forget vague predictions. In these accounts, children knew names of distant relatives, nicknames of pets, the contents of secret drawers, and the exact circumstances of the deaths of people who theoretically never existed to them. The system then calculated the probability of a casual hit. In a typical case, a child names 5 members of their other family correctly. The chance of someone randomly guessing 5 Indian or Turkish names in the correct family combination is approximately 1 in 3 billion. It is easier to win the main lottery twice in a row than to do this by chance. And if it were a single case, we could call it a miracle and move on. But when we have thousands of cases with this same mathematical impossibility, the word miracle becomes useless. We are dealing with a pattern. The skeptic's strongest argument has always been cultural contamination. They said children only tell these stories in countries where belief in reincarnation is common, like India or Thailand. It's a logical argument. If society rewards you for telling a story, you'll invent it. We asked the machine to test this hypothesis. It performed a cross-cultural analysis, comparing cases from Asia, Europe, Africa, and North America. And the system's conclusion demolished this theory. The structure of the memories is identical in all regions. An American child from a Christian family describes their experience in exactly the same way as a child from a Hindu family. The only difference is the parent's reaction. In India, the child is heard. In America, they are taken to a psychologist. But the signal, the information transmitted, remains unchanged, like a universal protocol that ignores the cultural code of each place. However, the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. We asked the system to analyze the causes of death remembered by the children. Mortality statistics in the world are well known. Most people die of old age or disease. If children were just fantasizing, their stories would reflect this reality, perhaps with a romantic touch. But Stevenson's data shows a terrifying deviation. In 70% of the cases, the children remember a sudden and violent death. Accidents, murders, disasters, armed conflicts. The system highlighted this data block with a red marker. Why so many tragedies? The system's conclusion was rational and at the same time frightening. The machine suggested that the transfer of information only happens when the session is abruptly interrupted. When you shut down your computer correctly, all temporary files are cleared. But if the power goes out suddenly, if you pull the plug, the system might save an emergency record of what was happening. The phenomenon we call reincarnation with memory may not be the rule. It may be the error, a glitch in the consciousness recycling system. The emotional charge at the moment of a violent death is so intense that it literally burns the information field, creating a backup copy that is loaded into a new body. We aren't supposed to remember. Nature designed a forgetting mechanism, but in these thousands of cases, the mechanism failed because of an overload at the final moment. If a memory can be imprinted with such force, what else could be transferred in this process? If the information of one person's death can survive and manifest in the mind of another, could it leave a mark on something more tangible? Could the information of a fatal trauma imprint itself not just on the neurons, but on the very flesh of the new body? The mind can lie, but does biology leave scars? Or does it? When the machine began to analyze the photographs from the archive, we entered a territory that went far beyond memory. We were about to challenge genetics itself. Memory is treacherous. Our brains are not video recorders. They reconstruct the past every time we try to access it. A child can hear a story and come to believe it with all the strength of their soul. That's why memories, no matter how statistically anomalous, still leave a small margin for doubt. The skeptic can always say they are just mind games. But what if the proof isn't in the mind? What if it is indelibly printed on the body itself? What happens when information about a violent death manages to alter the biological architecture of a new organism? Now we leave psychology aside and enter the territory of pure biology. We fed the system the most controversial and visually shocking section of the Stevenson archive, 210 cases where children didn't just remember their deaths, but carried physical vestiges of them on their bodies. These were birthmarks and congenital defects. To medicine, birthmarks are accidents, a genetic flaw, a random mutation in skin pigmentation during gestation. No one looks for meaning in them. But we were looking for a pattern. The machine's task was to analyze the location, shape, and structure of these marks and compare them with medical reports on the causes of death of the previous personalities. We were looking for a correlation. What we found was an exact match. The human body is vast territory. What is the probability of a child being born with a mark exactly at the point where, according to the files, a bullet entered and killed a man 5 years earlier? The system calculated. The chance is less than 1%. It's low, but it could still be coincidence. However, Stevenson's archive contains something that breaks probability theory definitively. 19 cases of double marks, children born with 2 birthmarks. One small, sharp, circular in shape, the other larger, with irregular edges. And both were positioned on the trajectory of a penetrating wound, one on the chest, another on the back, one above the ear, another on the opposite side of the skull. We entered the ballistics data into the system. The algorithm compared the characteristics of entry and exit wounds of projectiles with the shape of the children's birthmarks. The conclusion was unequivocal. The smaller mark corresponded perfectly to a small-caliber bullet entry hole. The larger mark on the other side of the body corresponded to the exit hole, where the projectile tears the tissue as it leaves. The probability of 2 birthmarks appearing randomly, perfectly mimicking a bullet wound in the correct anatomical trajectory, is 1 in 3 billion. It's the same as being hit by lightning on your birthday twice in your life. The system highlighted the case of a Turkish boy born with a severe deformity in his right ear. Additionally, the right side of his face was visibly asymmetrical. The boy claimed that in a previous life he was a man who had been killed by a shotgun blast at close range right to the head. Stevenson found the autopsy report for that man. The document described how the ammunition destroyed most of the right ear and damaged the facial bones. The machine created a 3-dimensional model of the wound based on the report and superimposed it on a scan of the child's head. The deformation zones in the child and the impact area of the shotgun on the dead man matched by 95%. How is this possible? The genetics of the boy's parents contained no instructions to deform an ear. It was an acquired injury, not a hereditary disease. Our machine proposed a hypothesis it called psychosomatic imprinting on the embryo. We know that the mind affects the body. Stress can cause ulcers. What we see here is an extreme mental impulse, the memory of pain and physical destruction at the moment of death, which becomes a kind of faulty blueprint for the forming fetus. The embryo's cells follow the instructions they receive. If the informational blueprint of that consciousness says destroyed ear, the cells build a destroyed ear. They simply reproduce the trauma because, at the instant of death, that information was recorded with the highest priority. If the body could remember the shape of a bullet, how far could this physical memory go? Could it hold something much more complex, like an entire language that was never learned? Learning a new language is perhaps the most complex task the human brain faces. It requires thousands of hours, the creation of new neural connections, and the training of muscles to produce foreign sounds. It is a monumental task. Neuroscience is categorical. It is impossible to wake up speaking a language you have never heard. Knowledge does not emerge from nothing. But what if there were people who broke this fundamental rule? People who begin to speak dead dialects or languages they physically had no way of learning. Skeptics call this cryptomnesia, hidden memory. The common explanation is that the person heard the language at some point in childhood, perhaps in a song on the radio, and the subconscious recorded it. Years later, under hypnosis or stress, the brain merely reproduces these sounds like a parrot, without understanding the meaning. This is explainable, but it wasn't this type of memory we were looking for. We filtered the data, removing all cases of simple repetition. We focused on those who could maintain a coherent dialogue, answer questions, and use slang. And the results shake the very foundation of what we call identity. The system analyzed recordings of an American housewife who, under hypnosis, assumed the personality of a man named Jensen Jacobi. He spoke Swedish, but not modern Swedish. Linguistic analysis revealed that he used words and grammatical structures from a 17th century peasant dialect, terms that today only specialized historians know. When Swedish linguists spoke with him, asking complex questions to confuse him, Jensen answered instantly, without errors. The probability of an American woman without formal education having learned this archaic dialect, for which there are almost no public records, is mathematically zero. If an entire language can be remembered, what about other complex talents? The same logic applies to child prodigies. History tells us that Mozart began composing at age 5. We fed the system his first scores. By age 8, he was already writing symphonies with the harmonic complexity of an adult master. The machine then crossed this data with the map of a child's cognitive development. At age 8, the areas of the brain responsible for planning and abstract thinking are still in formation. The mental workload required to compose those symphonies exceeded the biological capacity of Mozart's brain by 300%. It was like trying to run a state-of-the-art video editing program on a pocket calculator. Biology has speed limits, unless, of course, the neural connections were already ready. If the knowledge were pre-installed, we see the same pattern in mathematics. Carl Friedrich Gauss, at age 3, corrected a calculation error in his father's payroll. At age 3, he wasn't just counting, he understood the algorithm. He didn't learn mathematics, he remembered it. The solutions, according to his diaries, came to him all at once, complete. The most convincing proof, however, comes from modern medicine. We analyzed MRI scans of the brains of today's child prodigies. When an average musician learns a piece, their brain lights up like a Christmas tree. It's an immense effort. Now look at the brain of a 7-year-old virtuoso pianist playing a piece by Liszt. The brain is calm, activity is minimal. He is not struggling to create new connections. He is using roads already paved, wide and efficient. The system concludes that the neural network of that child has the topology of a professional with 20 years of experience. Where did this network come from? Genetics can give long fingers or a good ear, but it cannot transmit the knowledge of a sonata's form or the technique of a fingering. Information is not inherited. Prodigies demonstrate the presence of pure information. They are like old souls trapped in young, inexperienced bodies, frustrated because their small hands cannot execute the perfection their minds demand. But if all this information, memories, traumas, languages, talents, is transferred, if the archive persists, it needs a place to be stored. Where does this cloud of data stay when the old body has already decomposed and the new one hasn't yet been conceived? To seek an answer, we had to descend to a level of reality where the rules we know no longer apply. The strange world of quantum physics. Birthmarks and memories are just traces. We need to find the origin of the signal, descending to the subatomic foundation of the real. The final argument of materialism, the one that seems unbreakable, is simple and brutal. There is no carrier for the soul. Consciousness is a function of the brain, just as running is a function of the legs. If you remove the legs, the run doesn't fly to heaven. It simply ceases to exist. If the brain dies and neurons decompose, consciousness must disappear. You cannot save a song if the disc is broken. This logic worked for centuries until physics delved into a level of reality where our logic no longer works. Traditional science says the brain is like a biological computer with neurons acting as transistors. But this analogy has a fatal flaw. It cannot explain subjective experience. A computer processes data about the color red, but it doesn't feel red. It doesn't get emotional at a sunset. There is a chasm between processing information and having an experience. Therefore, the origin of consciousness can only be in a deeper place. In the 90s, physicist Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff pointed to a tiny structure inside every neuron, microtubules. For a long time, it was believed they were just the cell's skeleton. But what they discovered is that these protein structures are perfect for housing a quantum phenomenon. Inside the microtubules, our warm and wet brain manages to create conditions for particles to exist in multiple states at the same time, a process called quantum coherence. The brain then does not act like a classic computer. It functions like a biological quantum computer. And what we call consciousness is the movement of these quantum waves collapsing into reality millions of times per second. Why does this change everything? Because quantum information behaves very differently from ordinary information. We simulated the moment of clinical death. The heart stops, blood doesn't reach the brain. Electrical activity on the EEG zeroes out. For classical medicine, the file has been deleted. But at the quantum level, the story is different. With the failure of the biological system, the microtubules lose the ability to maintain the isolated quantum state. The barrier breaks, but the information doesn't disappear. Quantum physics has a fundamental law. Quantum information cannot be destroyed. It must go somewhere. At the moment of death, the quantum state, which is our consciousness, does not dissipate like heat. It escapes the microtubules and expands into the universe, but without losing its integrity, held together by what physicists call quantum entanglement. If you break a radio, the music it was playing stops, but has the radio wave, the signal, disappeared? No, it just stopped being captured by that specific device. It returned to the ether. Our soul is the signal, the brain is just the receiver. This is where near-death experiences may arise. Millions of people report the same sequence, leaving the body, the tunnel, the light. Conventional science says these are hallucinations caused by lack of oxygen, but hallucinations are chaotic and individual. Here we see a structured script. More importantly, there are verified cases of patients who, while their brains were clinically turned off, saw and heard things in other rooms of the hospital, details that were later confirmed. If consciousness were trapped in the head, this would be impossible. But if it became a quantum cloud outside the body, it makes perfect sense. And if the person is resuscitated, the process reverses. The quantum field collapses back into the microtubules. The signal is captured again. But if the body dies for good, the information stays there, recorded in the very structure of space-time. The universe is the final hard drive. If this theory is correct, if we are a quantum signal temporarily using a biological receptor, it opens a door to something even stranger. Quantum physics teaches us that time is not a straight line. If our essence can exist outside the body, can it also exist in some way outside of time? This leads us to one of the most common and mysterious human experiences, that feeling of, I've lived this before. Have you lived this moment before? Or does it just seem that way? Almost everyone has felt it. That electric sensation of recognition when you enter a new place or talk to a stranger, and suddenly reality seems to blink. You know what the person will say next. You know there is a red car around the corner. You aren't guessing, you are remembering something that logically could not have happened. Doctors call this déjà vu and explain it as a small glitch in the brain where a new perception is erroneously sent to long-term memory, creating an echo of familiarity. It's a neat explanation, but what if it's not a recording error but a glimpse of another recording? We analyzed thousands of reports of déjà vu and found a curious pattern. The frequency is higher in children and adolescents, exactly the periods when synaptic pruning is not yet complete and the connection to past information seems to be stronger. Even more intriguing is the content. Déjà vu rarely happens in mundane moments. It arises at points of decision, emotional tension, or danger. The system found cases where people didn't just feel recognition, but could predict what would happen next. A woman enters a store, feels déjà vu, and tells her partner, "Now the clerk is going to drop that can." Seconds later, the can falls. Neuroscience cannot explain prediction. The brain cannot remember an event before it occurs. The only logical explanation is that the event has already been recorded before. The system proposes a model where time is not an arrow but a vinyl record. All the songs, all the possibilities are already recorded on the tracks. The needle, our consciousness, travels one track at a time, but occasionally the needle can jump and play a segment of a neighboring track or a previous turn on the same track. Perhaps we are living the same life or variations of it repeatedly, trying to fix mistakes. Déjà vu would then be a marker, a checkpoint, a moment when in a previous pass something important happened. Your quantum memory, the one that wasn't totally erased, sends an alert signal. I have been here before. This sensation forces you to stop, to change course. Survivors of catastrophes frequently report strong déjà vu moments before the accident. Something that made them act differently, which saved their lives. It is a tip from your previous version. Watch out for this point. This all resolves many questions, but it opens a new one, a mathematical paradox that skeptics love to use. If souls reincarnate, if it's a closed cycle, why has the Earth's population exploded from 1 billion to 8 billion people? Where did these 7 billion new souls come from? From the perspective of simple arithmetic, it's a checkmate on the theory of reincarnation. But reality may not be so simple. The system proposed some solutions. The first is fragmentation. Who said a soul is an indivisible unit? Perhaps a larger consciousness can project itself into several bodies at the same time to accelerate the collection of experiences. One soul divides into 10, each living a different life. With the population increase, fragmentation intensifies. The second is migration. Buddhism speaks of being reborn as an animal. The biomass of wildlife on the planet is drastically decreasing. The graph of species extinction is a mirror of the human population growth graph. What if animal consciousnesses, upon reaching a certain level of complexity, gained the right to incarnate in a human body? They would be the freshmen in the human school. The third hypothesis is the most complex of all and involves the idea of non-linear time. We think 8 billion people live now, but if time is relative, if all eras exist simultaneously to an external observer, then the problem of numbers disappears. A single soul could be living the life of every human being one after another in a non-linear sequence. I am you in another life. We are the same entity in different stages of development. The most likely scenario, however, is a combination of the first two, souls that fragment, and a flow of evolving animal consciousnesses. Mathematically, the paradox is resolved. But if we are all part of a system, whatever it may be, what are the rules of the game? Is there that balancing force they call karma? Or is it all just a chaos of accidents and luck? If reincarnation exists, we need to understand how this reallocation of consciousnesses works. Is there a cosmic accounting for our actions? The question that haunts humanity is not whether there is life after death, but whether there is justice in this life. Why do cruel people prosper while good people suffer? If the universe is just a chaos of accidents and brute force, then life has no meaning. But if reincarnation is real, if consciousness survives, then there must be rules. There must be an accounting system for our actions, a balancing force that humanity for millennia has called karma. We asked the machine to find the algorithm of destiny. We analyzed biographies, regression data, and cases from the Stevenson archive that traced connections between lives. We were looking for the formula for crime and punishment. And what the system found completely destroys our primitive, human notion of justice. The idea that karma is a change machine, you do good, you get good, you do evil, you get evil, was the first thing the analysis overthrew. This direct correlation only happens in 12% of cases. If the universe were a punitive system, this number would be close to 100%. But the universe doesn't operate like a judge. It operates like a physicist. It doesn't care about our morals, but rather about the balance of experience. What the machine revealed was a much deeper and more elegant pattern that we call role reversal. Life is not an exam where we receive grades. It is a data collection. The soul is a research probe, and its mission is to experience the full spectrum of sensations. To understand power, it is not enough to be king. One must also be the slave who fears that king. Only the sum of the two experiences provides a complete understanding of the phenomenon. The system found a rigorous law in the chains of incarnations. The tyrant of one life becomes the victim in the next, but not in the way we expect. In one analyzed case, a cruel landowner in the 17th century abused his servant. By our logic, in the next life, the servant should take revenge, but the universe has a more efficient method. In the following incarnation, the former owner was born with a severe physical disability, completely dependent on care, and the former servant was born as his mother. It is an algorithm at once beautiful and terrifying. The tyrant is now totally helpless, forced to learn humility and gratitude, and the victim now has absolute power over their former oppressor. But instead of revenge, they must learn mercy and care. The chance of a soul learning the lesson through love is 7 times greater than through mirrored violence. But how does the system decide where to send each consciousness? The answer lies in the moment of death. The final and dominant emotion a person feels acts as a guide for the next birth. We call this the vector of emotional inertia. A soldier who dies full of rage and the desire to fight, for example, frequently reincarnates very quickly and in conflict zones. It turns out this wasn't a punishment. It was a matter of affinity, as if the frequency of that consciousness corresponded to the vibration of war. He is drawn to the battlefield like a magnet. In the end, the last and most important question remains: why? What is the goal of all this? We gathered all the data and asked the system for a final simulation. The answer was cold, logical, and absolutely grandiose. Our reality is a learning simulation. Let's assume that the universe, or God, or the source, is a single vast consciousness. How can something infinite know itself? Only by dividing into billions of finite fragments and sending them into an environment of limitations and resistance. The material world. We are the research probes of this consciousness. Our mission is to collect experience. Each life is a data collection session. Every emotion, pain, joy, loss, and love is a bit of information that, after death, is uploaded to the universal consciousness. Reincarnation is the perfect mechanism for the evolution of complexity. In one life, you learn to be a blacksmith in medieval France, but you don't know what it's like to be a scientist in the 20th century. To become complete, you need to live all possibilities. This place is not a prison, it is an academy, and we are here voluntarily. The difficulty, the suffering, the resistance, these are the weights in the exercise. The heavier your life, the greater the challenge your soul chose to grow faster. In the end, death perhaps doesn't exist. It is just a change of equipment. You are not going to disappear. Your mistakes are not sins, they are lessons. You don't need to be in a hurry, for you have eternity. And most importantly, we are all one. The person who hurt you is just you in another phase of learning. Judging them is like judging yourself in first grade for not knowing how to solve equations. The data stops here, but your simulation keeps running. At this very moment, look at your hands, feel your breath. You are an ancient and powerful entity, temporarily pretending to be a human being to participate in this incredible game called life. Play well, and we'll see you at the next level. If you like this investigation, your subscription to the channel and any donation help us expand Project Numa. We would love to read your reflection on the subject of the video in the comments and your suggestion for the next topic to be covered. Tell us which city you are following us from. I thank you for your company until the end. M.